The Fountain by Denise Levertov. Don't say there is no water to solace the dryness at our hearts. I have seen the fountain springing out of the rock wall and you drinking there. And I too, before your eyes, found footholds and climbed to drink the cool water. The woman of that place, shading her eyes, frowned as she watched, but not because she grudged the water, only because she was waiting to see we drank our fill and were refreshed. Don't say there is no water. That fountain is there among its scalloped green and gray stones. It is still there and always there, with its quiet song and strange power to spring in us, up and out through the rock. Here ends the reading. Sometimes I think about the span of human history and how mind-blowing it must have been after the invention of the printing press, when people could read scriptures and other religious texts for themselves, a privilege that had been for centuries afforded just to clergy. How the world opened. And similarly, later, Ralph Waldo Emerson, the grandson of the Puritan church. His father was a clergyman, his grandfather was, getting his hands on the Hindu texts, the Upanishads, and other texts from Eastern traditions, volumes that had to be shipped across the sea to him in Concord, right? No Amazon.com getting it the next day. Not even, available in the library. How he would have had and did have his horizons expanded in ways that infiltrated his philosophy, and subsequently his philosophy influenced American culture tremendously, and actually world philosophy. Even in my own lifetime, I remember so well the absolute shock of walking into a bookstore in Evanston, Illinois in the late 80s, actually mid-80s, okay, and seeing books with titles like She Who Is, The Mystery of God in Feminist Theological Discourse, and Beyond God the Father, Mary Daly's really important book. And you might remember this one by Starhawk, The Spiral Dance, a rebirth of the ancient religion of the great goddess. These were not in any library I had ever visited. We didn't have the internet, and I had no way of being exposed to these ideas. And even though I was raised in a Unitarian Universalist church by two atheist parents, I had no idea I still had to deconstruct and investigate and interrogate the God concept that was just coming through to me from our culture, just sort of in the wallpaper and in the water. So all that has completely changed. For those interested in spirituality, in questions of ultimate meaning, it is fairly simple to find meditation, body practice, workshops, retreats, lectures on YouTube, teachers, gurus, and more books and podcasts than you could ever consume in your lifetime, in person and online. Any time of day or night, 2 o'clock in the morning, you're having an existential crisis about the afterlife or, the survival of the human species, you can get online and find so many resources. It's unremarkable now to find people who identify as Jewish who practice forms of Buddhist meditation, sometimes right in their temple, Or the Catholic who goes to yoga class, which is a Hindu devotional body practice. Or a Muslim who attends a Zen retreat. Human beings have always had a syncretistic or blending approach to traditions and been influenced by each other's cultures and traditions, even when the dictates of their own group forbids it. That has just always happened. Unitarian Universalism is a religious tradition with historical roots in liberal Protestantism, and it is intentionally pluralistic. On purpose, right? We do it on purpose. The Reverend Fred Muir, a UU minister, wrote a book called Heretics' Faith, a vocabulary for religious liberals, and he writes, there are those who fear falling in their religion, who fear falling from the path of faith. They think that religion is restrictive rather than liberating, confining rather than freeing, punitive instead of affirming. The free faith embraces us as we are and says there's no need to fear falling from the path because first, there are many paths to be tried, and it's a matter of finding yours. And second, we are part of a strong web, which, if you let it, will buoy and support you along your way. Over the years, the UU community has done some good work to define what that web is that holds us in the wide path of the free faith, in the pluralistic tradition. In the early 1980s, after too many years of grappling with the question of what unites us as a people and as an association of independent congregations, our General Assembly hammered out a list of principles that they crafted into a covenant. And the covenant you can find in your gray hymnal. This is an old hymnal, by the way. We keep wishing they would revise it. But in the first couple of pages, right here in the intro, you have our UU principles. And you will notice, you will notice that we affirm as a congregation almost every Sunday a covenant of our own that starts, love is the doctrine of this church. Sometimes people say, well, isn't the covenant, the sacred promises that Unitarian Universalists make in community, isn't that all in the principles? Yes, and historically, because our congregations were gathered around a covenant that the founders would write together, congregations also have their own covenants. So it can be confusing. Now, our covenant that we currently are using and have been for a long time was never formally adopted by this congregation. There was never a process or a vote. It was just something the minister liked, and we've just done it for years. So, remember we talked at the beginning of the year about wild change? I will be choosing other affirmations to include in our worship service moving forward to hear others, to see if they might resonate with us on a different level. Are you ready? Will you freak out? Right? No, right? No, really, some congregations it would be like, but we can do that. So we'll hear some more and we'll see what language we really love and we'll get feedback. We can change them up. As we pursue spiritual meaning, though, we rely on sources of wisdom and tradition and also authority, which is a big issue when people ask each other, well, what gives you the authority to make these faith claims? We have inner authority. We have the authority of people affirming together what seems to be right and true. And we also have the authority granted us by tradition. So you will see under the principles, the living tradition we share draws from many sources. Let's read them. And as we do, I invite you to think about where you are finding spiritual wisdom in your life, on your journey, whether you're a brand newcomer or you've been at this a really, really long time. Reverend Chris will be sharing some of his journey through the sources next Sunday. But let's just look at them together. Direct experience. The first one is really wordy. Boy, do we love words. Direct experience of that transcending mystery and wonder, affirmed in all cultures, which moves us to a renewal of the spirit and an openness to the forces that create and uphold life. Or, as my friend Tom Shade jokes, the force formerly known as God. Direct experience. Okay, so that comes to us from the Transcendentalist era, which was Ralph Waldo Emerson and men and women like him, Margaret Fuller, who claimed that direct experience of the holy is a perfectly legitimate source of divine wisdom. This is the mystical tradition. But the mystical tradition coming up against the orthodox doctrines often got people in trouble, maybe burnt at the stake, exiled from community, as happened to Anne Hutchinson in the Puritan era. So this has historically been dangerous stuff. So that's why we cannot take it for granted that that is affirmed in this tradition. That is affirmed here. You will not get brought before the Inquisition and question, was this experience of Satan? Or was this a holy experience? You better prove it. So that's really, really serious to claim that. The second source, words and deeds of prophetic women and men, and of course now I would say appropriately say human beings, people, because there are some non-binary people who are prophets, which challenge us to confront powers and structures of evil with justice, compassion, and the transforming power of love. Well, you may think, of course, but not really something, again, that is accepted in other faith traditions who have one prophet, one allowed authority, just Jesus, or just the Baal Shem Tov, or just, I'm trying to think of Mary Baker Eddy, right? So that's also really an invitation to find prophetic voices, plural. So, if you hear, when I get up on Sunday and I give a reading from Bill McKibben, the environmentalist prophet, or Rachel Carson, or Dr. Martin Luther King, or whoever, it's because those are people we consider to have prophetic voices. They speak truth to power. And there's not just one. Revelation is not sealed, is an important tenet of this tradition. The third source, world religions, wisdom from world religions, which inspire us in our ethical and spiritual life. Take a look around you. These stained glass windows, designed, I think these might be Lydia Breed designs. They represent world religions. We're not claiming to be Taoist or to be Jewish or to be Christian or to be Muslim if we use wisdom from those sources. We are saying that we respect how different world religions have been able to grasp some of the ultimate truths and to respectfully engage with them. And the key word there is respectfully, because we have to be careful not to claim to speak for traditions. And that has been something that has been a challenge for us over the years. We can sometimes proof text or pull little preferred phrases out of sacred scriptures of world religions, for instance, and use them to our ends. We have to be constantly, again, responsible and say, this is our understanding of this. This is our look at this. But it is an acknowledgement, this source is an acknowledgement and an invitation to take seriously the study of world religions. The fourth source, Jewish and Christian teachings, which call us to respond to God's love by loving our neighbor as ourselves. Notice that in Unitarian Universalism, we always recognize and respect the sibling relationship between Judaism and Christianity. We understand and always recognize that Jesus was a Jewish rabbi and reformer. And so it's important to constantly keep that in mind in a world where many Christians think of Jesus as his own thing and to use the Christian scriptures as a way to reject or critique the Jewish scriptures and the Jewish tradition. And we call that supersessionism. That's when people look at the whole Hebrew Bible and the Jewish scriptures and say, well, that was all just a run-up to Jesus. It's very insulting, it's anti-Semitic, and that's something we do not do. Note also that this is the only source that contains the word God. The only one. Now, the fifth source, another very wordy, heady statement, humanist teachings. And listen to this, which counsel us, I always like to read this in a very deep voice, which counsel us to heed the guidance of reason and the results of science, and warn us against idolatries of the mind and spirit. Wow. That's kind of using the humanist tradition as a gatekeeper or watchdog. And I think that's interesting because there can be idolatries in any concept. I think you might agree with me. And the painful challenge that has faced strong humanists in this current generation is that the humanists really thought and hoped and believed that the human species would morally evolve, just as we evolved in our understanding of science, and just as we became very technologically advanced. They believed in progress, and do believe in progress and the human ingenuity to really solve all the world's problems and our moral problems. I mean, you tell me, has it happened? So it's been a really hard time for the humanists as well, because of course we've had this regression of moral evolution, right? I mean, fascism is on the rise. All of this kind of appeal to the irrational, people very suggestible to really terrible ideas and practices. So it's been really hard and very humbling to be a humanist, and I consider myself a spiritual humanist. And finally, the sixth source, which was added amid much controversy in 1995, spiritual teachings of earth-centered traditions which celebrate the sacred circle of life and instruct us to live in harmony with the rhythms of nature. I'm guessing that for many of you, that's the most it's the most shining of the sources. I think the concern back in the 90s was about paganism, which is kind of funny now, of all the things to worry about. That's my least, and not at all a worry. There were a number of voters who argued against its inclusion, and there were people also who were concerned that it was co-opting indigenous religions in irresponsible ways. But with 27 years of hindsight, or maybe 28, my math is really bad, most of us are really grateful that this source was included, because the climate crisis, did you see New York City underwater again? The climate crisis has revealed the dire consequences of not being deeply and reverently connected to the earth and to indigenous wisdom. Indigenous leaders and activists who are the heirs of thousands of years of earth-based spirituality are many of the prophetic voices that we refer to in the second source. You may find that you have sources of religious wisdom and inspiration that aren't included here. I have some of my own. I would add the transcendent aspects of music and the arts, film, including film, opera, theater, and architecture. Human culture, essentially. I would also personally include living with animals, who daily teach me about being truly present to the present moment. So finally, again, the question of authority. In many religious paths, as I said, there's one source of claimed authority. And these people are considered to be speaking for God, and we never say that in our tradition. We say that we are seeking together to access a deeper and possibly transcendent resource for what we determine to be true, right, and good. And this requires investigation, inquiry, courageous and generous sharing, and listening, and supporting each other in the search for a spiritual ground upon which we can stand confidently and upon which we can live reverent and ethical lives. For ultimately, we understand, those of us who take the search for spiritual and theological clarity seriously, and do it with gratitude and joy and commitment in community, is that we're not considering questions of ultimate meaning as a mere intellectual exercise, or as a debate, or in competition with any other faith tradition. We do it as in the way that a wise swimmer heads to the shore when they have been out in the wild ocean for a long time and they are tired in the waves. In a world of incoming storms, of shifting sands, where we are thrust constantly into environments of disorienting and sometimes even dangerous elements, we must find, if not always common ground, solid grounding. I look forward to hearing more about the sources of faith that speak most deeply to your heart, your mind, and your life.